Hey guys, it's Matho here once again, and I wanted to make a video today about the Atlas and the Atlas passive tree. So it's going to be a bit of a basic video talking about the various mechanics for people that are pretty new to PoE, but also just basically wrapping up what I do for my Atlas strategy, if you could call it that. Pretty much every league, but what I do this current league, so you can see what I'm doing this league, but then also a bit general about the stuff I usually kind of gravitate towards. So to kick things off, basically Act 1 to 10, you do that, right? Campaign, storyline, whatever the hell, kill a final boss. You then start the real end game system of Path of Exile, and that is maps. You start from tier 1 maps. So we take these out real quick. Start from tier 1 maps, and then slowly over time you notice you get higher tier maps and work your way through the entire thing, getting higher and higher tiers all the way up to tier 16s. That's where level 83 monsters exist, and that's where you can get really good XP, really good loot by the time you've filled out your entire Atlas, which is to say basically ticked off every single map possible. You will start to notice your loot is going up dramatically, the amount of monsters out there is dramatically higher, and it is a lot more challenging. It starts to get vastly more rewarding, especially once you start to fill out a lot of the Atlas passives. And it's a big, scary looking tree, but it's basically just there for you to pick and choose a couple of things that you really like doing and then focusing on, and then also to eliminate the things you don't like doing from showing up in your maps. Every single map is going to typically have a few league mechanics, which is past content from PoE. Every 3 months there's a league, and some of them get incorporated into the game, the mechanic. Some of them get expanded upon. Some are really good, some a bit whatever, but they're largely polarizing. So there's like 10 different mechanics or so to really heavily spec into this on this map. And a lot of people love some, a lot of people hate those same things, and it's a huge diverse system. There's no real wrong answer here. Essentially, you just spec heavily into whatever you like doing, and then it'll be profitable in its own way because you'll be getting certain things for certain league mechanics that help you more than someone else, and if you've got too much of that thing you can start selling it, etc. So there's no real wrong answer. Do whatever you like doing, and then just have fun with the game. So to quickly go over my strategy before we talk about anything else, I usually just try something a little bit different every league, but my core go-to ones are usually Expedition, because Expedition just is pretty fun to do, I think, and then on top of that it's fairly rewarding because it can give you lots of currency, it can give you some gambling stuff for items, and then you can also craft items using ROG, which might randomly give you some of the best looking items out there. So in general, I like Expedition the most to help set me up for the league and also help just get established on certain items or currencies. I also usually take Harvest early on because Harvest, it's not too challenging to do, and on top of that it is fun to have just a bit of extra of your own Harvest currency to be able to reroll certain items in your own way that you need to, without having to go buy this sort of stuff. Just occasionally, try and help finish craft an item using Harvest system. So I usually go for those two, and then something else, a bit of an X factor. I try kind of different every league. This league I'm trying out strong boxes, which have been pretty damn good this time around. Got several divine drops that got like doubled. It's fun seeing more div card and more arcanist boxes in maps, so strong boxes are pretty cool. And also I'm trying out heist, just so that I get way more heist contracts and also completed heist contracts. So blueprint, so they're fully revealed. So I usually try something a bit different. That's a bit different one. And I also usually grab shrines, I think, just because having a couple extra shrines in a map randomly that boost you feels pretty good. And then I also usually take Stream of Consciousness because This means that you don't put in any scarabs, and then you just get more of the content you have kind of spec'd into. And I don't really particularly enjoy micromanaging scarabs. Personally, they are definitely a powerful system for you to get more of what you like doing. They just give you certain extra content, or like enhance the content you're caring about per map. I don't really like micromanaging them with your maps and putting them in, so I can't be fucked. I just typically grab stream of consciousness and then do scarabs sometimes if I really want to juice things up. So that's usually what I do, and then I block the other stuff that I can't do. Blocking stuff is pretty powerful, but it is it can be on a per character basis. Some characters are going to be really good at some content, some characters are going to be really bad at some content. And even if you particularly like doing a piece of content, it might not be worth doing on a character, and you kind of just want to like block it instead. So like Breach, lots of extra monsters might overwhelm you a bit on a certain character, so it's not really worth doing even if you like it. So maybe it's worth blocking for that particular character and then unblocking when you've got a different character that really enjoys Breach. So currently I've got Breach, Abyss, and Legion blocked, and I've also blocked Blight, Delirium, and Metamorph, which leaves me with some heist stuff that drops. I do get Ritual, even though I'm not spec'd into it. It's an okay mechanic just for like extra monsters and some random rerolls and stuff. Still get my Harvest and still get Expedition. Then the other stuff there is at the top side of the tree that's usually very endgame heavy, and it's the type of stuff that pretty much everyone should have, unless you're doing some specific weird shit, which might involve Wandering Path, which can be very good in its own way. Typically, if you're just going to be playing the game fairly normally, you will be grabbing Remnants of the Past, and make sure that by the time, as you're progressing your Atlas, by the time you've got to like higher tier maps and you get these watchstones, you get these watchstones from, you can hover over and see where they're coming from. Defeat the Maven, defeat Elder in Shaper's Realm, and then Exarch and Eater of Worlds. Defeat those, you get watchstones, and what the watchstones do is just boost all of your maps to higher tiers. Once you get all 4 of them, all your maps become tier 16s, and then you can basically favorite whatever maps you like doing. They'll drop more often, and then they're going to be tier 16. That's the whole point of that watchstone system. So by the time you're getting to like tier 14 pluses, that's when you really do want to be getting to this top side of the tree and speccing into this. So you get your Elder and Shaper Guardian maps to start dropping from bosses, because that's like a large part of the end game content and boss rush and stuff. You then also typically do want this one as well. 1.5% chance for synthesis maps to drop from final map bosses, tier 11 plus, and then also map bosses, Conqueror maps. So this is going to be giving you a lot of the end game maps and content from bosses. So it's pretty valuable to get into pretty early on. And then on top of that, it's really good these days with destructive play, Maven summoning additional bosses when you try and Maven witness bosses. Through this node, you get so many more bosses when you're encountering your boss at the end of the map. Overall, and you're just going to get so many more rewards from these because they do seem to work. So I've already had a couple of Cortex drops, I've had several other synthesis maps, and I've had lots of Guardian maps, and I haven't really done that much endgame mapping. Alternatively, a lot of people farm like Eater of World altars, and you spec into these, and then that has a small chance of giving you a real high roll on an altar that can give you lots of divine orbs, or you can go a much more consistent farm method for currency and stuff from your altars with Exarch altars, and then they typically just give you a good amount of like chaos or chisels, that sort of thing, much more reliably instead of the high roll. So that's the typical overview of Atlas strategies. I mean, if you really struggle on getting higher tier maps and filling out your maps, speccing into some of the map stuff is pretty worth doing as well. It can be very powerful, and for a very few points, But there's a lot to read, there's a lot to like pick and choose from, and make sure when you're doing your maps you're using your Kirak missions for extra map sustain. He's going to give you free sort of maps every now and again, and they help fill out your atlas, and on top of that Kirak will also sell you some maps. And every single time you use a Kirak mission, it's going to reroll Kirak's offerings. So check in on those as well. It should be pretty easy to sustain maps and fill out your atlas just by putting some time into it. Got to use some chisels, got to use some alks and chaos. And for what it's worth, you typically start using some alks and chaos on yellow tier maps. You typically start using your chisels on around red tier maps, but probably save them for like tier 13 plus. But then, yeah, you start filling out your atlas and start learning what kind of mechanics you really like doing. And just as a quick overview, so heist is a very separate mechanic to mapping and Path of Exile, and it's going to be able to generate just about anything in the game, but some of the more interesting items and gems. So you will be getting alternate qualities. I don't know if I have any like this. It's the only source in the game for alternate qualities reliably. You can get them from divination cards as well. And heist can be pretty powerful for that, as well as that. Replica unique items. I don't think I have any on me, but they're just a whole nother tier of unique item in Path of Exile as well. So heist can be very powerful, but it is a very divisive league mechanic. A lot of people like it, a lot of people really hate it, and it's completely outside of the realm of the mapping system. But you can still spec into it and just get heist stuff and then just sell it if you want. It's just an additional bit of stuff that's going to drop in your maps, and you can just click it, pick it up quickly, and then not care about it and just sell it. That's also an option. We then have metamorph. So throughout your map, you're just going to see icons on monsters, kill stuff. By the end of the map, you just spawn one hard uber sort of little mob and kill it, and then it'll drop certain things, just a few little items, but the most special thing that it does is catalysts, and that is these guys here. These enhance the quality on your jewelry, so your rings, your amulet, and your belt. These, some of them are a bit rarer, some of them can cost quite a lot, so we're looking at the prismatics, we're looking at the fertile. They're very strong for your items. Some are going to really want some of these catalysts. Otherwise, they can just be worth a lot to sell. So it's not a bad mechanic to make a quick bit of profit on without too much interaction. Delirium is a very sort of large mechanic. It's going to be the thing that is at the start of a map usually, and it makes the entire map gray, and it'll spawn more monsters, and it'll have much more loot. And the special thing about that is cluster jewels. I don't know if I have any laying around. Haven't saved any. Cluster jewels are going to be an addition to your passive tree that go to the side of the passive tree, and they're another huge extra addition to Path of Exile, and that's pretty typically the only place you're going to be getting clusters reliably. Once again, delirium content. And it's just a lot of extra loot, but I don't really like it personally just because it washes out your map and makes everything kind of gray and dull and bland, and a bit more challenging. So there's lots to spec into that, and lots of people love it for their farm. Blight is throughout your maps, but also additional maps will drop that have blight content in them. But blight is kind of Path of Exile's answer to tower defense, or at least its attempt at doing that. So you'll have waves of monsters coming down certain rows, and then you build towers, help kill those monsters with those towers as well. Or nowadays you can actually spec into a really big node that makes it so it's much more tower defense heavy. The special thing about Blight is going to be giving you oils, which are for your anoint system, for giving an additional passive to your amulet. And you can see that throughout your passive tree. If you just hold Alt over any of your notables, that's what you need, these certain oils. Some are going to be quite expensive to get and require very high tier oils, gold oil being the highest tier there. And yeah, Blight can give you a lot of these, and it can give you a lot of other loot as well. It's a fairly damn rewarding mechanic, especially culminating in blighted maps. but once again, pretty divisive. A lot of people like it, a lot of people do not, but can be very worth speccing into. Ritual, you'll just throughout your maps do 3 or 4 little zones that have lots of monsters in it, and then at the end of it you'll collect a certain currency that you can re-roll a bunch of loot into. Once again, can be fairly rewarding. It's not hugely rewarding like some of these other League mechanics, but it does have high rolls where you can sometimes find a really big item and then buy it from that vendor. It's just more about lots of monsters, waves of lots of extra monsters throughout your maps, and a lot of people love this thing. I leave it for most of my characters just because it's pretty seamless addition to PoE mapping where you just kill a bunch of extra stuff. We then have Legion. That one is going to be a big sort of fight between 2 armies that is currently frozen. You kill as many things as you can to break those out and then do a second fight. Can be pretty challenging, and the special reward around that is let's have a look here. The general tab, so it's these splinters that once you collect enough of 100, you'll get a certain key, and then combine those keys either 4-way or in the end 5-way in your map device will give you a separate sort of zone where you kill a bunch of stuff, and then you can get big special jewels, but otherwise mostly just loot. Lots of loot, lots of XP, and yeah, a lot of people love this shit. It can be some of the fastest leveling in the game if you do lots and lots of these things, but throughout the mapping, typically it's just kind of a pretty dangerous and time sink of an encounter. For me personally, I don't really like it too much, so I don't use it that often, but a lot of people do love it. We then have Harvest. As I went over, you get just little side area, kill a few mobs, get a few harvest currencies, and then that lets you interact with certain additional crafting on the harvest crafting bench. Can be very good and very mandatory for certain crafting, but it's usually a bit optional, so up to the user on that one. We then have Expedition, as I mentioned, another one I like. It can be very powerful for additional currency and also for rolling certain items. And then I'm testing this new node that just gives a big explosion. I'm not sure it's too worth it, but it's kind of fun. On certain characters with really good expedition clear, it's probably almost always going to be worth it. Then I have Abyss. Abyss is you'll encounter a hole in the ground, and then that hole will spew out lots of monsters, and then it'll go somewhere else and then a lot more monsters. If you spec heavily into this, it will spawn out a lot of monsters and can be very good for XP. The loot from it is nothing huge, but it does have some special loot in the form of abyssal jewels. So you'll have things like these. They're just additional jewels that you can socket into abyssal sockets, and also abyssal belts. And then it'll also sometimes have a different zone that gives you a chance at a certain cool unique item. So it's not huge on the loot, but it's very big on the XP, and it can be some pretty powerful loot. And then lastly, we have Breach. Touch this sort of breach hand in a map and it expands out lots of extra monsters. Can be pretty overwhelming. I think most people typically like this one for just lots of extra mobs. Not hugely rewarding these days, but it does have its own special stuff in the form of splinters. Where are they? Breach splinters, which collect enough of them, an extra key, go somewhere else into different little map area, and potential for a lot of XP and also a different unique item. But pretty seamless additional PoE gameplay throughout your maps. Just have a bunch of extra monsters. Not too many characters I actually spec into this. It's not really worth doing unless you've actually spec'd into it. Like if I just have it show up in my maps, it's not great. You'd have to kind of like spec more specialized into it, and then it becomes pretty worthwhile. But I don't want my maps to take too much extra time, so I don't typically do this system. And just to mention, if it's not obvious enough, if you hover over the middle of whichever thing you're looking at, so for example Delve here, it will highlight anything else that has Delve nodes across the tree. It's not super obvious. Let's see. with the delve, I think. If we'll do strong boxes, for example, you can kind of see that a bit better, right? Nah, it's still not great, but otherwise you can just search for that stuff, right? Strongbox, and then it'll highlight any nodes to do with strong boxes. So yeah, there's that too. And Delve is one I didn't actually touch on. That is another separate system outside of regular PoE mapping that is just going to be a big underground cave that's basically endless, and some people farm all day long, but it's got nothing to do with your mapping pretty much. And that special system in the end gives you some of these, which is another form of crafting in PoE. It's fossils and resonators, and it's far from mandatory, but for some forms of crafting, it's going to be the most efficient way of doing it. But otherwise, it's just a different sort of end game mapping system. Not really a mapping system, but a different system for end game in PoE. I think that's all I really should mention or talk about. Like I said, my usual strategy is to kind of go harvest an expedition and then try out some different stuff. I don't worry about being too efficient on the tree. I just, take it as I go, and maybe there's better routes and stuff, but I don't even bother respecing or figuring them out till later into the league if I can be bothered. But currently, that's what I've got, and yeah. Usually once I'm ready for Ubers, I'll start speccing into Uber stuff and then leave it for most of the league, just because I can usually try and test my characters against Ubers. But there's a lot to do and a lot of choices to make on this thing, and it's going to be pretty much up to the individual, and there's usually just about no wrong answers. So hopefully that helped, and hopefully you got to look into my Atlas and strategy. Thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time.